To the U.S. state of Florida now, where rescue teams have been working around the clock since Hurricane Milton hit the state this week. One search mission brought them 50 kilometers out to sea, where they found a man in a life jacket clinging to a cooler. You can see him there. The cooler is that white little bit that he's floating on. As Hurricane Milton approached, a rescue operation was launched after contact was lost with the man who is the captain of a fishing vessel. He was spotted the next day. A spokesperson for the U.S. Coast Guard said the man had survived a nightmare scenario. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden says the damage bill from the storm is around $50 billion, even though officials say the devastation wasn't as severe as first feared. A massive cleanup effort is now underway. The widespread flooding and power outages are still causing problems.
The aftermath of Hurricane Milton reveals the scale of its force. Recovery efforts are now underway and the task is immense. Boats lie scattered across main roads. Neighbourhoods are flooded and homes are flattened, with many lucky to escape alive.
I never experienced nothing like this in my life. It felt like I was in a movie. I'm very devastated from looking at how my place looked right now. It was very life-threatening. I felt like I was about to die.
Milton hit Florida as a Category 3 hurricane with winds of around 200 kilometres an hour, triggering more than 24 tornadoes. It later weakened to a Category 1 storm and moved out to sea. While the worst-case warnings for Milton did not eventuate, it has left a massive trail of destruction. Millions are still without power.
Everybody got their power out. Here? Oh, yeah. Unless you're rich, you got your power out.
Generators.
The storm came just weeks after Hurricane Helene hit Florida.
It makes me feel like things, I don't know if it will get better from here, only worse. Because, I mean, with climate change, two major hurricanes in 2 weeks.
Florida's recovery will come with a huge cleanup bill. The White House pledged government support as the full extent of the damage is surveyed. Some analysts estimate the bill could come to $100 billion for insurers alone.
Well, disinformation and conspiracy theories have been a recurring problem with natural disasters. Katie Nickolaou is a meteorologist who has been receiving death threats after she reported on Hurricane Milton. Katie, so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining the program. Could you briefly tell us what happened to you?
Yes, I was doing what I normally do in terms of engaging people about the weather, and a post seemed to strike a chord when I said you couldn't blow up hurricanes with a nuke. And instead, a person opted to suggest stopping the breathing of people associated with, in his mind, creating these storms, which is a threat that is unfortunately apparently happening to a lot of meteorologists in my field.
How does that make you feel?
It's disheartening. You know, these kinds of threats, they're nothing new. I've had people threaten to kill me over telling them that icicles could have bird poop in them. So when you enter this field, you kind of learn very quickly that that's a possibility. But to see the scope of it and the scale of it, especially around Milton, is concerning to say the least.
Mm-hmm. In this case, part of the disinformation came from high-ranking politicians, people the public really trusts. How worried are you about that aspect?
Well, it's interesting. When it comes to what I engage with online, it depends on where they are, if these people are even real. They could be bots. And so instead of really pinning down who these people are, it's just kind of like talking into an empty abyss. And you don't know what's happening on the other side. All we can do is see what they engage with us as and try to answer as many questions as we can.
And let's look at the real-life repercussions of what happens online. How can false information, disinformation, misinformation impact disaster response in the wake of hurricanes like Milton?
Certainly. One of the big things that comes from it is you get people who will post something online for clicks or engagement that's completely false. And then people who wouldn't know any better, just see it pop up in their algorithm, take that as the truth. And then they potentially spread that information. And so even just one post with 1 million views can have massive stretching repercussions. It's like a root system. And unfortunately, meteorologists can't go and find each and every one of those people to tell them, hold on, that was bad information. This is actually the real thing. And so it's kind of like putting out 1 million fires with only one fire extinguisher. And we're doing the best we can, but it's a problem because you'll get people, for example, with Milton, who said that it turned into a Category 6 hurricane. A Category 6 hurricane doesn't exist. The scale stops at a 5. And so now you have people wondering, well, wait, are you lying to us by saying it's only a Category 5? Someone else said it was a Category 6. And that just adds a layer of confusion that really isn't needed in these kinds of situations.
The fact that Milton turned out not to be as devastating as meteorologists widely predicted, do you expect that to play in the hands of those willfully spreading disinformation?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking with a couple of colleagues how earlier before Milton, we were told that we can be wrong half the time and still get paid, which isn't true either. And now people are saying that we can control the weather exactly down to where it hits and the strength of it. Those are true. We're just a bunch of nerdy kids who grew up to become meteorologists trying to help people. And so now, especially after Milton, when we tried to convey hurricane information, you have a scale with the category scale. You have forecast cones and a lot of information that can be very tricky to ingest, especially if people are just catching it in quick little news clips or online articles. And so you already have a layer of question as to why and how. And now you have extra questions as to why did it weaken? And that's a lot more than what I could explain in a quick 3-minute news segment when it comes to like my regular forecast or other people's forecasts. So time is definitely a factor when it comes to explaining what's going on right after an event.
And unfortunately, we are out of time, though. As meteorologist Katie Nickolaou, don't let the haters get you down. Keep doing what you're doing. Many thanks, and please be well.
Thank you. You as well.
Michael Pearce is Deputy Chief U.S. Economist at Oxford Economics, an independent economic advisory firm. Thank you so much for joining DW tonight. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden has just said that the hurricane caused damages of around $50 billion. Could you break that down for us and explain what that figure means exactly?
Yeah, so obviously in the wake of any major disaster like this, the focus is on the human casualties and the damage to physical infrastructure in the region. So $50 billion is the amount of damage that's caused. But when we're thinking about how the economy is going to perform after this, clearly there's an initial period of economic disruption. Still got more than 2 million Floridians without power. There's going to be job losses. A lot of businesses will remain closed in the coming days and weeks. But typically what you see from hurricanes is the economic impact tends to be relatively short-lived. Once cleanup crews get in there, the reconstruction money starts flowing in. We see a rebound in activity. We see construction efforts. And so really we should see economic output rebound relatively quickly from this storm. So over the coming months. But obviously that doesn't take away the scale of the physical damage that's been done by the hurricane.
You mentioned job losses there. Could you explain how unemployment could become an issue here?
Yes, so we've already seen, we got the first evidence from Hurricane Helene a few weeks ago. We've just seen jobless claims in the affected states have risen relatively sharply. So, at least 30,000 more people claiming unemployment insurance in the weeks after that disaster. I expect that we'll see a similar, albeit smaller, rise in unemployment claims from this hurricane as well. So we tend to see that play out in the coming weeks. But once those cleanup efforts get underway, once businesses are able to reopen, actually what we see is that job loss get reversed, and we see a temporary boost to economic activity as those cleanup and rebuilding efforts get underway. So any economic disruption, I think, is likely to be relatively short-lived just over the next month or two.
So you're saying that this is not going to take too long until Florida bounces back. What about more vulnerable communities?
Yes, clearly. It's going to take some time for the communities to involved to rebuild. When we're thinking about the impact of a hurricane on the national economy, we're thinking about the size of the economy affected. The good news here is, as we heard in the report, the damage not as bad as initially anticipated. And a lot of that's because we didn't really see the widespread devastating flooding that was expected for very populated places such as Tampa. We've estimated, the counties in the path of the storm, in the direct line of that were directly hit, accounted for 2.5–3% of the U.S. economy. So clearly, those communities are going to take time to rebuild. But for the national economy, that's a relatively small part of the total, and we only tend to see much broader economic impacts from hurricanes where there's more national damage, and we tend to see that when a lot of the oil infrastructure that we see in the Gulf of Mexico gets disrupted. So just the location of this storm away from the energy infrastructure suggests that there's not going to be an impact on gasoline prices in the rest of the US. So, I think any damage is going to be relatively localized, and the national economy overall, relatively insulated from this localized incident.
Michael Pearce, Deputy Chief U.S. Economist at Oxford Economics. Thank you so much. Great speaking to you.
Rick Davis is an emergency response meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Tampa Bay area of Florida. Welcome to the program. Now, the National Weather Service warned that flooding will continue for the next few days or even weeks. Now, the hurricane has passed, so why is that?
Well, all the rain that the hurricane produced for the area, and especially right along where the eye moved and north of the center, that rainfall was torrential. We had up to 18.5 inches in some areas, and our grounds were already saturated from a very wet summer rainy season, and we just had Hurricane Helene dump tremendous amounts of rain 2 weeks ago. So because the antecedent conditions were so wet, any rainfall was going to be problematic, but a foot to 18 inches of rainfall were really bad for the area and produce extremely devastating flooding. And some of our rivers are in record flood right now.
So essentially, this water that accumulated is going to have to drain somehow in order for the flooding to dissipate.
Correct. And so it's not just our rivers that have been in flood, even our smaller creeks and tributaries, as well as just lakes or retention ponds around neighborhoods. So all that water that has fallen everywhere has to find its way into creeks and then the main stem of rivers. So the flooding will continue for several weeks probably.
So what is the biggest task at hand right now for the emergency response teams trying to help people in the areas that were devastated by the hurricane?
So this hurricane produced some of the worst damage from all four aspects of hurricanes. Obviously, the very large and powerful destructive wind field, very deadly tornadoes, violent tornadoes. I've been here 25 years, and this might have been the worst tornado outbreak I've seen in the Florida Peninsula. Very large tornadoes. The rainfall flooding, like I said, was tremendous, and the large wind field. So as the storm was making landfall, it expanded. And so the wind field of wind damage was over 100 miles wide, and it extended all the way across the state from the Tampa area through Orlando and to Daytona. It just produced a lot of damage. And so our responders are organizing and setting priorities. We've been in contact with them. We provide them weather information and luckily we're going to be dry for this week. There's no storms coming in the near future. So we expect them to orderly prioritize the response and to help the people in need the most.
So Milton was the second hurricane in a month to hit certain areas of Florida. Will that be the last of the hurricanes for this season?
Well, that's far too early to tell. Hurricane season runs through November. We do expect an active season, and it was off to kind of a slow start, but has really picked up activity. There's still systems out in the Atlantic, so we still have another 6 to 7 weeks before hurricane season is officially over. So at this point, there's no immediate threat, but we just have to stay vigilant through November.
Okay, Rick Davis, meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Tampa Bay, Florida. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day.